Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. This is our final episode before Penn State takes on USC Saturday afternoon out in Los Angeles. An exciting Big Ten matchup, the first of its kind, with Penn State making that trip out to the West Coast. They will, of course, host Washington later this season, hosted UCLA, but this is their one chance to get on the road against these Pac-12 transplants. And we discussed USC at length in our last episode, which went live on Wednesday morning. If you missed that, we had a Trojans insider from within our 24/7 sports network breaking down where USC stands at 3-2, coming off a really disappointing loss last Saturday night at Minneapolis, and really where they're at from a health standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, the strengths, weaknesses. So I'd encourage you to check that out if you missed it on Tuesday or Wednesday. We also had Tyler Calvaruso breaking down the latest in recruiting on that episode. As usual, on our Thursday episode, we bring on board Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen, my colleagues at Lions247, to look ahead to the upcoming matchups. Game 6 on Penn State's 2024 schedule. They are number 4 in the nation right now. And we got a lot to talk about in this particular matchup, but usually we begin on Thursdays with a review of the latest updates from Penn State practice. And we'll get into it right now. And Mark, the big item that we came away with on Wednesday was that Nick Singleton was not only in pads out on the practice field and present on the practice field, which he wasn't last Wednesday when we got our look, but he was full go in our 15-minute window. He was going through some receiving drills. He was going through some resistance band speed training, and he was also going through a pretty physical collision drill where running backs were asked to carry the ball, lower their shoulder, and work through a blocking sled. So if Nick Singleton's dealing with anything that could prevent him from going full capacity against USC, it wasn't very noticeable on Wednesday, and that's a very good thing for this offense.
If we've learned a lesson the last 2 weeks, it's to look before you tweet. Because when I got there, the running backs were kind of off in a different area, and somebody else was in number 10 as a receiver. And I actually went over to Tyler and said, I don't see Singleton out there. And then we turn around, and he's right there. So I had to go track down Tyler. He's like, yeah, I saw him. So it's weird when you're at these practices. So I have to admit that I messed that up, but that's why you look before you tweet. I didn't go to Twitter. I don't go to Twitter that much anyway. But listen, in all seriousness, to have him back, I think one thing we saw in that UCLA game is what his explosiveness kind of brings to the offense. Kaytron Allen, I think Daniel said it earlier this season, you know what you're going to get out of him almost every carry, every game. The yards per carry are always the same, but he doesn't quite have that flair for busting the huge run. And I think Singleton does, and I think that forces defenses to play a lot more honest. So having him back going on the road against the USC defense that's played pretty well under Danton Lynn this year, they've gotten tired in some games, and I think having two running backs to kind of go, back and forth against that defense, probably going to pay dividends in the fourth quarter.
Mentioned this on Monday, but against UCLA, the longest run for the Nittany Lions was an 11-yard pickup for Kaytron Allen. No one had a longer pickup than 6 yards beyond that. And when you look at what Nick Singleton did for those first 4 games, averaged almost 8 yards per carry, 3 carries going for 40-plus yards, a reception of at least 13 yards every single contest as well. So, Daniel, knowing what we've seen from Nick Singleton and really pushing that 2023 regular season further back into the rearview mirror, what do you make of Singleton being back, being with this offense? Drew Aller told us on Wednesday he's excited to get that explosiveness. What do you make of his return for this particular matchup?
It adds another dimension. Like we've talked about before, Nick Singleton is one of those home run hitters. He's a field flipper with what he's able to do. We've seen that already a ton this year with the amount of times he's gotten loose for 40 yards, for 20 yards, for 10 to 15 yards. It's just very different. I think that you sort of see the difference between Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen. I mean, they're both really good backs. They're both strong in their own particular way, but Singleton just brings that extra element where anytime he touches the ball, it can be a touchdown. And I think you saw that was missing against UCLA. You didn't quite have that element that, Kaytron Allen can get an extra 3-4 yards through contact. Sometimes Nick Singleton can get an extra 50 yards through a tackle. So I just think that it's something that Penn State is going to need, especially in a game where you might need to score quickly and score often. So the more firepower you have, the better position you put yourself in.
James Franklin told us on Monday he was very confident that Nick Singleton was going to be ready to play on Saturday in Los Angeles. So far, it looks like things are on track there. We also saw an encouraging sign with Anthony Donko involved in practice. He was in his uniform. He was participating in the positional drills we saw later on in practice during our viewing window. Daniel noted that he did not participate in some one-on-one reps. We got a brief look at them between the offensive and defensive lines. I brought up Anthony Donko to James Franklin after practice. He went out of his way to say they expect him to be available. He said we expect to have him at USC. He didn't say we expect him to start and play 50 snaps. And I think that's the next kind of part of this equation is Anthony Donko available to start? Is he available in an emergency situation? I think regardless, though, Mark, we're going to see a lot of Nolan Rucci again at right tackle on Saturday.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of the offensive linemen in general. I mean, again, we talk about that USC defense, injury depleted, missing one of their best players, obviously, in Gentry, most likely. When you go back to the Minnesota game and see what the Gophers were able to do in the final 8 minutes of that game, they basically just controlled the clock and scored 2 touchdowns. And that was a, 24-17 game. So that was not a high scoring game. So again, just like with the running backs, I think being able to rotate those linemen in there is going to keep Penn State fresh toward the end of the game. One of my favorite things from practice yesterday, and as we record this on Thursday, so that would have been Wednesday. They're going through offensive line drills, and Nolan Rucci didn't get great leverage at one point. And Frank Leonard went over to him and said, "You're 6'7". I don't give a bleep. You got to work on getting down and getting your leverage, getting low." So, it just goes to show that they're always teaching these guys, as well as the offensive lines playing. Just announced as a Joe Moore, whatever, midseason honoree. You could always get better. But depth is going to be a key, I think, on both lines.
Yeah, the Moore Award goes to the top offensive line unit in the country. They announced 22 mid-season, I guess, honorees, or I don't know if that's cutting down to the finalist list, but Penn State made that cut. Rucci's been involved consistently week by week, but last week it was his show at right tackle, essentially, for the final 3 quarters of that matchup against UCLA. Anthony Donko was sidelined. He was in his uniform. No specifics on this, but we'll keep tabs on that. These 2 guys, Mark Brennan and Daniel Gown, are making their way out to Los Angeles, so they will be in the stadium well before kickoff, as usual. We'll have a bunch of updates at Lions247.com in terms of involvement from some of these players who are maybe a bit questionable, and what it looks like as kickoff is nearing. By the way, Daniel's already completed the first leg of his journey out to Los Angeles. He went in the opposite direction to start, drove to Philadelphia, and that's where he's broadcasting from right now. And Daniel, another availability note, and this one isn't surprising because we saw him with a boot on his left foot last week, and he was listed as out for the UCLA game. But Caden Saunders, it's been on a rough journey for him in 2024 since that injury in August. James Franklin talked about lingering issues for him early in the season, keeping him out of the offensive plans, restricting him to punt returner, and at times he seemed restricted as a punt returner in terms of what he could do with the football. We don't know the specifics of this, but it seems like he's going to be sidelined for a bit. And with Zion Tracy stepping up last week, taking a couple opportunities to return the football, James Franklin said after practice yesterday, they feel like he can be a playmaker with the ball in his hands. And it sounds like that role is going to be his on Saturday. So where are you with what punt returner can be for Penn State this season?
It's going to be interesting to see on Saturday. I know that we talked about it or wrote about it a little bit after the game Saturday when we got our first couple of looks at Zion Tracy in that position, that he looked decisive. He looked determined to try to make a play. I think his returns were for 2, 9, and 0 yards. And each time he had the ball, even the one where he got stopped in his tracks, it was still a decisive move. He was going to return that. I think in that type of game, having that kind of mindset worked because Penn State had a little bit of a cushion. It was the third quarter. At that point, I think we knew that UCLA was not really going to be able to move the ball that well, get back into the game. But if you're in a close game and he has the opportunity to return one, I'm curious to see what happens there. James Franklin said that we saw Jake Spencer earlier against UCLA because they were backed up a little bit more. That was the punt safe situation. But I'm interested. I mean, I think that having Zion Tracy there, I think it raises the ceiling a little bit of what that position can bring. I don't know if that ceiling is necessarily as high as it was last year with Daquan Hardy, but we also don't really know where the floor is. I think with Caden Saunders back there, we knew that the floor was pretty much a fair catch, that was the sort of the baseline that we were operating off of. But with Zion Tracy there in a Big Ten game, pressure-packed environment, we'll have to see what that actually looks like. But I do like the upside that's there right now with Tracy.
Zion Tracy's a sophomore, one of the more intriguing figures on this roster, I think, not just because what we think he might be able to accomplish as a punt returner, what he has the potential to accomplish there, but his work at that slot position, maybe cutting into Cam Miller's work there a little bit. But the last couple of weeks, he's been more of an emerging factor for the defensive backfield playing in that slot. So something to monitor as well at USC. Moving on to Dom DeLuca. He's someone that returned to game action last week. But although he logged his first college start, he only played about 10 snaps over the course of that UCLA game. They got him to the sideline quite a bit, and he stayed there. James Franklin talked about the energy he brought to that special teams unit. They were pleased with how it went his first game back. He's learning how to operate with this cast on his right hand that's covering his thumb, his wrist, his hand area. Not the most natural thing to be doing as a linebacker when you've got to wrap up guys. But James Franklin indicated that his workload will expand this week, but he also threw in the caveat that it's probably not going to be where it was the first couple of weeks before he suffered that injury against Kent State. Franklin said maybe somewhere in between where he was last week and where he was before. And Mark, where he was before was getting about 50% of total defensive snaps. So if we're not counting on that much of Dom DeLuca against USC, that probably means more 5 defensive back looks, more Dakari Nelson. I know Dom DeLuca liked what he saw from Dakari Nelson, but ultimately I think it's good to hear that DeLuca is trending in the right direction, because I think he matters more to this team than a lot of people realize externally.
Yeah, I mean, not only what he does on the field, but he's been a multiple year captain now, and everybody knows his story, what he's gone through. So if he's on the field, great. If not, I mean, I think one of the things that really stuck out to me last week was we were wondering how long it was going to take for them to develop the confidence in Dejon Lane at safety, that they could move Jalen Reed back up to that Lion position. And as you noted, that's when DeLuca comes off the field. And anytime you could get Jalen Reed up in that area, near the line of scrimmage. I mean, I posted a photo on the Amin Vanover Zane Durant sack. Jalen Reed was actually being literally tackled. I mean, that's how much focus they put on that guy. Everybody knows how good he is. So, yeah, if you have Dom DeLuca out there, great leader, but it's not necessarily a bad thing if you're going to that line package. It shows the confidence they have in a true freshman. We were wondering how long it was going to take for them to develop that confidence. And frankly, I thought it might not be till later in the year. But to me, coming out of that UCLA game, that was one of the big things, because we know how good Jalen Reed could be in that role.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that a little bit more here as we preview the matchup. I wanted to finish here, by the way, that Dom DeLuca mentioned this is a bucket list opportunity for him in college football. He said growing up, watching college football, being a passionate fan, playing out at the LA Coliseum is something that he would qualify as on his bucket list. I don't think he realized when he went to Penn State that was going to be a conference matchup available to him by the end of his career. But here we are. And I think, Daniel, we've heard from different players that obviously the questions come up about a new setting. There's been a lot of historic moments in that Coliseum, and USC is one of the more historic brands, just like Penn State in college football. And so you throw that all onto the table, and you also say, well, Penn State's flying out Thursday. James Franklin will be recruiting on Friday in the Southern California area. They've got some commits out there. They've got some targets out there. Tyler Calvaruso and Brian Dunn will have more about what Penn State's looking to accomplish during this trip out to Southern California from that angle. They're going to be in SoFi Stadium, an NFL stadium, for their Fast Friday practice session. What do you make of what's ahead for the Nittany Lions between now and kickoff? I don't know what time their flight leaves on Thursday, but they're just about ready to board. Nick Dawkins told us they've got compression pants, leggings to wear to try to manage things. It's a long flight. Some guys are talking about taking long naps. Some guys are talking about getting up and walking around the aisles. They got to drive to Harrisburg to get to that plane too. Do you think this is as much of a factor as some on our beat and maybe as some among the fan base have made it out to be, that Penn State's having this cross-country trip that they haven't dealt with in the past?
I think it's definitely a factor. I think it's something to monitor. And I know that if they come out maybe a little flat on Saturday afternoon, then that's probably the first place that your mind goes, is the travel, what it was like getting out there, getting prepared. But, a couple of years ago, summer 2023, we were talking to Josh Nelson, who was the assistant director of performance science, and they were already preparing for this, already trying to figure out a plan for this. So it's not like the schedule came out in, I forget when they would have announced it. I think it was last October or last November. And then suddenly they're trying to make a plan, or like they didn't wait until the end of the Peach Bowl and then started looking for a plan. I think that we know how routine oriented James Franklin is and how routine oriented this program is. And I am interested to see what it's like having a little bit of a different routine. But I think it's interesting. I mean, I think that from the players this week, we heard for the most part, it was 1-0. We're going out there to win games. AJ Harris is talking about, some of his family members are from LA and they're going to get to see him play for the first time since he was in high school. And I think Mark asked him if he was going to get any extra time to see his family. And he said maybe, but he's out there to win a football game. So I think that that's where the team's mindset is. I think that they know, but there are also some pretty good nods to what it's going to be like being there. I mean, I covered a game in the Coliseum in 2018. It was under construction. I was basically sitting on top of the peristyle outdoors in an auxiliary press area. I could not see, I was so far from the field, but it was just cool to be in a place like that. I know that Dom DeLuca calling it a bucket list. That was a nice little bit of honesty. Drew Aller said he's familiar with the history. It was kind of funny doing some math in your head when these guys are talking about the USC dynasty. Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart. Drew Aller mentioned Carson Palmer. Drew Aller wasn't alive when Carson Palmer was at USC. Probably none of these guys were conscious during that run by USC in the early mid 2000s. So it is kind of interesting from that perspective where, for us, we saw Reggie Bush, we know what it is, but for them, that USC Reggie Bush is someone who lives on the YouTube highlights, might be a little bit more mythical. Maybe to the equivalence that maybe like a Barry Sanders was to me and Tyler's generation. So I kind of appreciated getting that nod. Sometimes it seems like that they're too much in the submarine, that they're too laser focused, and some of the stuff is obvious that's around them. So I thought that was kind of a cool line of conversation this week.
Yes, we all remember well when Pete Carroll and company were ruling college football. They were the coolest program in the country and the most popular and the most effective one on the field. That was a while ago, though, and that's where I want to get to next. Where's the energy going to be for this USC team? Lincoln Riley was a guy who was hired a couple of years ago, meant to kind of be the next Pete Carroll and build something very special. He was able to bring his former quarterback from Oklahoma, who ended up being, as advertised, a future number 1 NFL draft pick, a Heisman Trophy winner in Caleb Williams. And yet the hardware has been hard to come by for USC. That was when they were in the Pac-12, and we've seen what early Big Ten life has looked for them. A loss a few weeks ago at Michigan by 3 points. More surprisingly, a loss at Minnesota last Saturday. And so this is a team right now that, I don't know how they'll respond. And Mark, I don't know about you, but I'm not really willing to give Lincoln Riley the benefit of the doubt based on my conversations with people out in Los Angeles, based on where this team has been for the last season and a half, that they'll be able to flick the switch and they'll be able to approach this one with passion versus frustration. And then on the other side of the field, Penn State, hopefully you take some moments in pregame, look around, soak it in, and then say it's just a regular football field. We got 100 yards in between the end zones, same hashes, and we got to deal with an opponent in front of us. And what do you make of the read on energy and how that might matter as soon as we get to kickoff?
Well, I've been to the Coliseum. I covered a game there in the early 90s when Penn State played, and it's a really nice stadium. It's undergone renovations since then, but it's not like they haven't played in the Rose Bowl and, all these other places, Ohio State. I think Michigan's the most overrated stadium in the nation. People talk about how great that is. I think Ohio State's a much more intimidating atmosphere. So I don't know that that's really going to be a factor. I think for people who are old like me, who remember the Olympics there, I think that's kind of who I'll probably be looking around a little bit more like that. So getting back to USC, this is going to be interesting to see how teams react when they're effectively eliminated from the college football playoff. Could USC work its way back? Yeah, but it would basically have to win out. And I think what we've seen from that team, I don't know that it's it just doesn't, even the writers out there are thinking it's an extreme long shot. So now that you no longer have that to play for, are you going to come out angry and ready to play and want to prove a point? Or is it going to be like some of these teams who are relegated to lesser bowls and just not into it? Or, I mean, honestly, Penn State last year, everybody, all these opt-outs, and I'm not saying people are opting out, but it's like once you're not playing for the national title or once you're not in a college football playoff, even when it was 4 teams, I don't think we kind of saw the energy from Penn State in a bowl game last year that we saw in other bowls. And we did see it from Ole Miss because that was a new situation for them. So, yeah, this is a whole new dynamic because so many more teams are kind of impacted at this point. It used to be that, okay, if you weren't going to make the college football playoff, only 4 teams were making it. New Year's Six Bowl, there are still attractive things out there. Now, if you're effectively eliminated this early, where is your motivation? So I'm anxious to see what Lincoln Riley, I think this is going to be a good sign of what kind of coach he is. Do these guys kind of rally around each other, or do they kind of mail it in? And I think I had an opportunity to talk to Ryan Abraham, the publisher of USCFootball.com. And I think he's like a lot of us. It's like nobody quite knows what to expect, having seen what we've seen from this team the last 2 years.
And we had RJ Ebitia on our show on Wednesday. Hopefully people caught that. He's also from USCFootball.com and gave us a nice 20-minute segment on what he's hearing, what he's witnessed from USC so far. 5-7 in those last 12 games. I think when you look at Lincoln Riley and the barometer check here, it really feels like both sides of the ball. I mean, whether it's James Franklin or Lincoln Riley who picks up the loss, national media and probably local media are going to be ready to seize on that loss and kind of drive that narrative one way or the other, whether it's James Franklin taking the L or Lincoln Riley. When you look at USC's situation, Eric Gentry is likely not available for them. RJ told us on the podcast earlier this week that no one at USC was really expecting him to play. More clarity on that coming off the practice field midweek, as Lincoln Riley talked about Eric Gentry maybe taking a red shirt this year because he was injured, didn't play after 4 games. And so it sounds like they may shut him down. It's concussion-related issues is the reporting that we've heard. And with Gentry, he's had 6.5 tackles for loss the first 4 weeks. He's a guy that has 2 of their total 6 sacks as a team, and that was just in 4 games. And he was a big-time target out of the transfer portal from Arizona State a couple cycles ago, a guy that a lot of people around the country wanted. So, Daniel, when you hear that Gentry is removed from their equation, RJ told us that Gentry is probably the only guy in that front 7 right now that he would qualify as a real momentum-swinging playmaker. So you think about that matchup with their front 7 depleted a bit versus Penn State offensive line, what we've seen them do during the last few weeks, what we saw them accomplish during that second half against Illinois. Seems to me this is a very, very favorable matchup for the Nittany Lions.
It's something that's definitely trending in Penn State's favor. Gentry was a playmaker, and he's also a really unique athlete at that level. I think he was listed at 6'5" for a linebacker, just a really long presence there at the second level. And not having that, I think you lose the playmaking, but then you also just lose that physical presence. And so I think that things are tilted towards Penn State and towards this running game. I know that we talk about things maybe being a little bit of a shootout and a high-scoring game, but this feels like one of those games that could be a high-scoring game without a big game from Drew Aller, just because of what this running game is capable of. And it also wouldn't be a surprise if we get to later Saturday afternoon and Drew Aller has another rather ho-hum stat line, but Penn State wins and potentially wins comfortably. I think that, having Singleton back and all these factors coming together, I think bode well for Penn State, but you actually have to take advantage of it. You have to get there. You just have to be ready. It looked like Penn State didn't have anyone in Gentry's number for the linebackers on the scout team, which was a little notable Wednesday night. So I think they knew where things were trending. And it's just sort of, okay, we know that. Now you got to do something about it.
And this offensive line, they gave them a lot to digest this game week. They had 7-man looks against UCLA where you had Cooper Cousins and JB Nelson coming on the field, or Nolan Rucci. And so the spacing among the linemen, and then Venga Ioane and pre-snap motion, there's a lot in front of USC as they prepare for this Penn State offense. And by the way, the tight ends have done a really nice job blocking this year. They're part of that combination too. And let's flip the focus in the trenches, Mark, because the USC offensive line, they have not been dominant in run blocking by any means, but they have particularly struggled at keeping their quarterback healthy. And I think a lot of the USC folks, the guys who cover this team on a daily basis, they've told us that if Miller Moss can get some time, if he can find some comfort over the course of Saturday, USC is going to make this a 4-quarter game. They're going to be able to put up some points and they'll be able to stay on the field. But that's been an issue, keeping Miller Moss clean. And tackles Elijah Page and Mason Murphy alone have surrendered 27 combined pressures through their first 5 games. And I think about what Penn State's bringing off the edge at the top of that depth chart with Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton, and then kind of the X factor maybe, Zane Durant, and what he's requiring in terms of offensive attention on the interior. Again, Mark, this feels like an edge for the Nittany Lions at a very important point of the field.
Yeah, and don't forget about the depth. I mean, that's I keep going back to that, but I think that's one thing Penn State did through 5 games was establish depth. I mean, we talked about it last show. Amin Vanover, the job he does. I mean, you're chopping wood against Abdul Carter all game, and then in comes Amin Vanover. I mean, that's a very difficult thing. The problem that USC has is that the teams that have passed the ball effectively against Penn State have done it how? By getting the ball out very quickly. Bowling Green was tremendous at that until Penn State finally adjusted. And when you're unable to do that, we see what happened late in the game against Illinois, where they were pretty much forced to pass to try to get back in it. And Penn State has 5 sacks in 1 quarter. So, just talking to the people out at USC, Miller Moss is he's not as mobile as Caleb Williams. Not a lot of college quarterbacks are, but he is good when he gets some time. He's made good decisions, but it's just very difficult to be effective when you have to get the ball out that quickly. And he's also been hurt by a bunch of drop passes. So apparently the receivers, very athletic, very talented, but they've really burned him. There was an interception late in the Minnesota game where it wasn't his fault. I mean, the pass rush got through within a fraction of a second, and he got hit, and the ball's picked off. So I think that leans heavily toward Penn State, because what he needs to do, get time to pass, isn't what they're kind of equipped to do. So unless they kind of flip a switch and he's able to do more of the quick hitting passes, I think there's going to be some issues.
It's quite a dynamic, because last December, everyone's saying, well, what's USC going to do at quarterback? How are they going to replace Caleb Williams? And it feels like the narrative out there now is they found the quarterback. They love the quarterback, but the supporting cast isn't holding up its end of the bargain. So that's kind of where they're at. And we'll see if they get a complete game from their offense, but they're still kind of searching for that. And he's been the consistent success factor. He threw a pick-6 on the road against Michigan in the Big House, and that might crush a lot of quarterbacks, especially relatively inexperienced ones in that kind of setting. He threw 3 touchdowns on the day. He gave them a chance to win, and so he could be a problem for Penn State. Daniel, when we talk about Penn State's quarterback, Drew Aller, he discussed the opportunity ahead of this team. I know he had spotlight moments last year that didn't work out so well. He's got another opportunity here on the road at USC. And with this passing attack that he brings at the Los Angeles, it's different than the passing attack that he brought anywhere last year. It's different than the passing attack that he took to West Virginia coming out of preseason camp. Do you think that the evolution we've seen, the distribution of the ball, the depth of target, do you think that can make the difference in achieving not just balance with the run game, but really setting up Drew Aller for a star performance in a spotlight kind of game? Because people watched that Illinois game and they came away thinking, this guy's just a game manager. What is the 5-star arm? Do you think that's more obvious today after a couple matchups to open Big Ten play where he's back under 10 yards per target? He was about 12.5 yards per target during non-conference action.
I think it might be. I think a lot of it depends on the game flow, which I think if you're a fan of a team, that's what you want. You want a team that plays within the flow of the game, doesn't try to force anything, looks at what's working and keeps hammering it. I think that's what we saw in that Illinois game where it was working with Singleton and Allen. So why not do that? I think you saw the UCLA game. It wasn't working as well with Allen, but they were still grinding it away, staying on the field. They had control of that game. So they just stayed within that framework. I am interested to see what happens if USC goes up 7-0 from another slow start off the defense. Can Penn State counterpunch? How can they do that? How can they avoid letting that maybe snowball into 14-0 or even 10-0? I think that's where it would fall a little bit more onto Drew Aller's shoulders. But as I said earlier, this could be the type of game where at the end of the game, we look and Aller's only thrown 21, 22, 23 passes, and Penn State potentially has a comfortable win. This is a game that I don't necessarily have the game flow down, because I think that USC is a team that can score quickly through the air. Penn State's a team that with Nick Singleton can score quickly on the ground. I don't really know how that meshes together yet. But I do think this is a good opportunity for Drew Aller. He was talking about great opportunity just in terms of Penn State winning a conference game on the road, staying undefeated. I think it's a great opportunity for him in terms of having a national audience, being able to go out, show what he's capable of doing. Maybe some people that saw the Illinois game who weren't impressed, they can come away from this one impressed. And I think he'll have opportunities against the USC defense. And I think it helps that he's coming in with such a balanced receiving core with the 3 guys who've gone over 100 yards, Tyler Warren, plus someone like Julian Fleming, who's popped up a little bit here and there.
One note to get to on the defensive side of things, Mark referenced it earlier, but keep an eye on number 10. I know we've talked about keeping an eye on number 10 in the offensive backfield all week, but number 10 in the defensive backfield, Dejan Lane, the freshman safety, 30 snaps, easily a career high early in his career last week, coming off of 6 snaps against Illinois. So is he trending, or was UCLA an outlier? I think that's going to depend on what the Penn State defensive staff evaluated from his performance. But if he is able to have that longer leash and he's out there 20, 25, maybe 30 snaps again over the course of this contest, that means that Jalen Reed is probably playing a bunch in that line position. We know Zakee Wheatley is operating at a high level back deep in that other safety role. So if they're able to get in a spot where they can implement 3 safeties with regularity, I think that's where they'd like to live. That's where Tom Allen, the defensive coordinator, would like to be. But it's a process, losing KJ Winston, getting the freshman Lane acclimated. But it's something that we continue to keep focus on with this defense in game number 6. One note on special teams, of course, beyond the punt returner, Ryan Barker. He's got another opportunity, Mark, and it's going to be a different opportunity. He was on home turf. It was a relatively comfortable win, as it turned out, against UCLA. But this is one where a lot of people are predicting it to be hanging in the balance all the way down to the wire. You're out in Los Angeles. We already talked about that setting. And Ryan Barker, he's a guy I wrote about this week. He says that his biggest specialty as a kicker is his poise under pressure. We've heard that echoed by guys like James Franklin, special teams coordinator Justin Lustig, special teams captain Dom DeLuca spoke very highly of his day-to-day focus this week. But as long as he keeps making kicks, no one's going to really care about how he does it. They just want to see the production. So this is big to me, because if you can go to the bye week and you can file away another strong performance from Ryan Barker that doesn't involve mistakes or misses, then you can get to midseason and start to convince yourself that maybe you found a solution. And then if it goes the other way and it doesn't work out well in Los Angeles, then you're going to feel like you're back to square one through 6 games of the year.
Yeah, this is going to be a multiple game process. Either Barker grabs this job, is consistent, and thrives under pressure the way he says that he thinks he will. I'm not sure where he would get that from, because kicking in high school is a lot different than kicking the Big Ten or on the road at the Coliseum. He may well be. That may well be his thing. And for his sake, I hope it is. But, okay, he got the job done in 1 game, but we saw Sandor Sahaydak get it done in 1 game too, and then the next game it wasn't there. So until one of these guys is able to string together multiple games, I don't think Penn State can be completely comfortable. They have to earn the benefit of the doubt. I mean, that's what it comes down to. One of these guys has to go in there when given the opportunity, and this is Barker's chance. So let's see how he is able to handle it.
He is definitely a player to watch. We're going to talk about our specific players to watch, though, here in the spotlight. And Daniel, we'll begin with you. Who is the Nittany Lion who has your attention heading to USC?
I was going to say Dejan Lane before we talked about him, just because I think his ability to be playable in that secondary unlocks a lot for you. But since we already talked about him for a little while, I'll go with Zachy Wheatley. Last week was maybe the best game we've seen him play since he's been here in terms of just complete, being physical, being around, being in the right place. And so I think I want to see how he builds on that. We know he's the takeaway king. Can he bring that? I think this is the type of game where you could potentially have to steal possessions. So I think having someone like him on the back end is really important. And I think he's built very nicely on where he was last year, where we saw some struggles in a couple spots, and seems like he's really solidified things now this year. Can you take that next step in a big game like this one against USC?
Mark, who do you got?
I really wanted to go with AJ Harris because his grandfather, Crawford Williams, do I have that right? Lives 20 minutes away and has never seen him play at the college level. Now, Daniel reminded me that he's only a sophomore, so he hasn't really missed that many games. But that's going to be a cool story to watch. But I'm going to go to Nittany Dennis Sutton. He's been a really good player for Penn State for the last 2, even 3 years. I mean, and this is a situation where I think he has an opportunity to make that statement where everybody's looking at Abdul Carter, and rightfully so, as a first-round draft pick. And I just don't know that people realize how good Nittany Dennis Sutton is. And what better way to prove that than on a big stage, national TV, whatever you think about USC, it's an outstanding opponent on the road in a game where getting pressure on the quarterback is going to be the key. So I think we're going to see some big things from Nittany Dennis Sutton.
I thought about going Abdul Carter, but I went with him last week, I think, or the week before. And I thought about going Nick Singleton, but we spent 10 minutes talking about him at the top of the podcast. I'm going to go Tyler Warren. And maybe it seems very clearly obvious because he's an elite tight end and he's meant so much. But one, I'm just curious about what's next with that Wildcat package. And he was asked, are there things we haven't seen yet this week? And he responded, I don't know. We'll see. And I think that's clearly, 100% there are things we have not seen yet. And I think Andy Kotelnicki is probably going to take another thing or two out of the bag this week and showcase Tyler Warren as a runner. Maybe he'll throw the ball again, but I think we'll see him in that kind of versatile role, especially when they get near the goal line, perhaps. And then I think just generally when Drew Aller's looking for comfort downfield, Tyler Warren is going to fill that need. I don't love what USC has in terms of in the front seven dealing with Tyler Warren coming off the snap. Maybe they can they have some solid safety play. Maybe they're going to assign that. I just don't like their chances of getting it done with the linebacker unit. And I think they might try to. And so I could see Tyler Warren going out there and logging 5 or 6 catches by halftime, forcing USC to adjust its defensive plan, and then maybe opening up things for other players on this offense. But I'm expecting Tyler Warren to really assert himself early over the course of this first half on Saturday. And that's why I'm going with him. Let's go to our game predictions, which will also feature our bold predictions. Just a little series history here. USC leads the all-time series 6-4. They have a 3-game win streak in this series. That includes the last couple of Rose Bowl matchups these teams have met in 2017 and 2009. The last time Penn State won, Mark, you remember this one, 1996, Giants Stadium in North Jersey during the Kickoff Classic, which they played a couple of years there in Giants Stadium. I think they also played in 2000 when USC won. So been a while, almost 30 years since Penn State last beat USC. What say you, fellas? Let's begin with you, Mark.
People who have been around remember that 96 game. Curtis Enos and the great Aaron Harris, but for injuries, would have been an unbelievable NFL player. Absolutely destroyed USC. Listen, this was a game in the preseason that I thought Penn State was going to lose. I mean, frankly, I thought they would lose it. And my rationale was that, I've always talked about how James Franklin and this staff, they're kind of creatures of habit. And I think that's what makes them so consistent is their routine. That's why they rarely lose games against teams they're supposed to beat. But when you take them out of that routine, as we saw during the COVID years, they tend to struggle a little bit. And all this changing, and you're changing all these different dynamics with travel. I just really wondered how they were going to deal with it. I also look back at the 91 game when Penn State rolled in there to the Coliseum at number 5. USC was coming off a brutal loss to Memphis State, and Penn State lost that game. So not that really impacts it. I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit. But watching that Minnesota game, and seeing how those lines for USC struggled, especially late in the game, I just don't know that it's a great matchup with Penn State. So I think this is going to be a closer game than maybe some folks think. I'm picking it 24-20 Penn State with those lines taking over in the fourth quarter.
Now, we're at work with a 5.5 point spread in reality right now, but I know when you made that pick, it was a 4 point spread. So you're right on that. Right.
Well, I made it before there was a spread.
I mean, Mark has the difficult responsibility of doing a TV show on Sundays. And if the spread's not out, it doesn't matter. He's got to get a score prediction. So
bold prediction, though. I forgot.
Your bold prediction. What do you got there?
I think Nick Singleton rushes for more than 100 yards. That's not bold in and of itself. Katron Allen doesn't rush for 100 yards, but does get 2 touchdowns in goal-to-go situations. So Singleton does a lot of damage, but Katron Allen gets a couple of TDs.
When these two are on the field together through those first 4 games of the season, they're combining for about 180 rushing yards. So we'll see what they have in store out at USC. Daniel, your score prediction and your bold prediction.
I think that this is a game that Penn State can win and will win. I was in a similar spot as Mark coming into the season where I had this circled as one of the potential losses on the schedule, but I think that advantage in the trenches is going to be, a lot for USC. I think the battle in the trenches really favors Penn State, and I think that that's something they can really lean on and break out some big plays and set a tone early. I have Penn State winning 34-27. My bold prediction is that secondary really comes to play. I have them intercepting Miller Moss 3 times, and one of those going back for a touchdown. One of our commenters on the message board said, they thought that if my prediction came true, it would probably be an ugly game for Penn State. I don't necessarily view it that way. I think that this is a game that you're going to have to win on the margins, just with the caliber of opponent that USC is, and that involves getting a pick six, getting one of those breaks, trying to take advantage of those turnovers. So I think it'll be a close one, and I think that Penn State will make enough sort of extra plays, game-changing plays to get the victory.
Miller Moss has thrown an interception in the last 3 games. He threw 2 of them against Minnesota last Saturday. Like you guys,
we didn't get a score from Daniel.
Oh, we didn't get a score. Daniel just went right to his bold.
I thought it was 34-27.
You just missed it. And for the first time in a few weeks, I don't have the same score as Daniel, and I'll give you mine in just a moment. But I was with you guys when we were making our season predictions back in August. This was one where, I was concerned about. But at that point, I said USC is going to have to talk me into it. They're going to have to go out and prove it. And watch them beat LSU week 1. I'm thinking, okay, they played Michigan tough. I know Michigan's not the same as a team that went and won the national title last year, but they hung with that game, and I thought that they could walk away from it feeling pretty good. But what we saw last week and some of the things that have popped up on a weekly basis makes me think that USC is more of they are who we thought they were, especially in the trenches, not quite ready to come into the Big Ten and start bashing down doors and saying we're ready to compete for a conference championship and a playoff spot. And so I don't think Penn State's going to go out there and run away from them. But I think Penn State is over the course of 4 quarters. And Mark, you made the point about the kind of the wearing opponents down in the trenches. I think that happens today. Alonzo Ford told us after practice on Wednesday, he's one of those 5 defensive tackles involved in the rotation. He says they notice every week when they get toward the tail end of games, offensive linemen don't have the same legs that they have on the defensive line because of their rotation, the way they stay fresh. I think that's going to add up. And I think the offensive line, though, is really going to be the story here versus USC. The ability over the course of those 3rd and 4th quarters to sustain drives, milk clock, punish USC and kind of take their heart and soul out of it. And ultimately, I think Miller Moss will come up with some plays. He'll show folks that he's an NFL type prospect moving forward. But I just don't think he'll have enough enough of those plays to mount the comeback. And I think Abdul Carter will play a big role. I'll just dive in my bold prediction. I think Carter gets unleashed a bit in some new ways, maybe some new wrinkles we haven't seen through those first 5 games, at least 3 tackles for loss. And he forces a momentum swinging turnover to help keep USC out of reach. I've got an 11-point spread here, guys. I'm going 31-20 Penn State. I don't think it's going to be that comfortable all the way through, but I think they'll find a way to get some separation on the scoreboard in the 3rd, 4th quarter. The defense will put it away. The offensive line and the running game will put it away, and they'll reach their bye week at 6-0, at least number 4 in the nation, and literally everything on the table for them coming out of that second bye week. So that's where we are. We all think Penn State's going to improve to 6-0. Mark and I both checking in with USC reporters. We got a couple, including our predictions. They both have Penn State beating the Trojan out in Los Angeles. So it would be an upset, certainly, if the Trojans are able to pull off that win, although it's just a 5.5-point spread. It feels like some people are certainly putting more stock in Penn State reaching 6-0. Guys, safe travels. I hope everything goes smoothly and you're able to get to Los Angeles without any concerns or distractions. But we will get to you on Saturday here on the podcast. Daniel, Mark, of course, your coverage will be available at Lions247.com throughout. You'll both be in the press box before kickoff. Get our pregame notes, get our postgame coverage, and get our postgame podcast on Saturday at Lions247.com. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions247 Podcast.